This is Pam Varner, and in this video we are going to do paper piecing with freezer paper. So first of all, let's go over the supplies that we're going to need. You're going to need thread and a needle. I use a 75 needle for piecing, so whatever needle you would use for piecing. If you use a 75 needle, just pay attention to your manufacturer's restrictions on whether you can use your automatic threader with a size 75 needle. I use a 60 weight thread for my piecing. So bobbin and the needle, I use the same thread. So whatever thread you like to use for your regular piecing. I use a regular stitch length that I normally would use for piecing when doing this because you're not stitching on the paper, you're stitching right next to it. And then the feet. So you can use a 1/4 inch foot if you want to because it has a little opening here so you can see what you're doing. What you're doing is you're placing the needle next to the paper. So as long as you can see the paper and you can see where the needle goes, your 1/4 inch foot will work fine. Some people like to use an edge stitch foot. So an edge stitch foot, it's also called a stitch in the ditch foot, has a blade on the bottom. So you run that blade right up next to the paper and then your stitch will go next to the paper wherever the blade is at. So that's another foot that you can use if you'd rather. Now, I have add a quarter rulers. The thing about an add a quarter ruler is that it has a lip on it like this. So you can butt it up against your paper and you can trim right up there and get a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you don't have an add a quarter, you can use a regular ruler with a 1/4 inch marking. However, my favorite ruler is the add a quarter plus. It has the same lip as an add a quarter, so you can do the same thing with that, but it has a tapered edge here that allows you to fold your paper very nicely, and you get a nice crease in your paper. So I have a label here, do not cut, because my last one I used a blade and went right onto it, and it's very thin, so it's really easy to ruin. So I got another one. So don't cut on this edge with the little thin side. Cut on the beveled side with the beveled edge. Okay. Next step, rotary cutters. I prefer to use the 28mm rotary cutter for paper piecing. It's easier for me to use this when I'm sitting down, and I stay seated when I'm paper piecing. Then I also have a 45mm regular rotary cutter that I use if I'm going to pre-cut my fabrics depending on the pattern pieces, and also to trim down my block when I'm done with it. So I use that. I have a paper rotary cutter that's labeled paper that I use when I cut out my pattern. So there is that. I also have an iron. Now I have this little mini travel iron that I use at my sewing station when I paper piece. So I also have put a wool mat on my surface. So I iron on the wool mat and everything is fine. The heat doesn't go into my table. And then last but not least, we have our light stick. You can use a light box or a light stick. This is really nice because, there we go. This is really nice because I can put it under my Sew Steady table or the insert on my machine in my cabinet, and I can see through it. So I don't know if you can see through this on the camera, but I can make out my pattern through there, where if it's just like this, I can't see through it. So, and then last but not least, you need freezer paper. So freezer paper for your printer is easy to come by. You can get it at a quilt shop, you can buy it online, but it has a shiny side to it. This is the shiny side. And then it has a flat side. So the flat side is the side you print on. So just know your printer and know which way. On my printer, I have to put the paper in this way, and it comes out the printer like that, and it prints on this side. So just know that. And those are the supplies that you need. Next up, we will make our pattern. This is a 6-inch rose pattern that we're going to make with our freezer paper. And the first thing that I want to do, this is the pattern. The first thing I want to do is check that this is an inch. So I'm going to use any ruler and measure that that's an inch. Mine is exactly an inch, which is perfect. If yours is off, you may need to adjust your printer percentage size, but check to make sure that you're printing at actual size. And then this should come out to an inch. This dotted line is going to give you a 6.5-inch unfinished block. The solid lines are sew lines, so this is a 6-inch block. And the first thing I want to do is trim this up. So I'm going to take my ruler and I want to go about a 1/4 inch past the cutting line. So I'm just going to go a 1/2 inch past my solid line. This makes it a little more easy to work with. So, and I can trim this all the way around. And I do have a rotating mat, so I might as well use it. And I'm using my paper rotary cutter. There we go. And the other thing I want to do is I want to cut my little key here. This is my fabric key. And I'm going to keep this by my machine in case I forget what color I'm on. And I'm also going to use it, I'm going to pre-cut fabric. Depending on the shapes in my paper piece pattern, I may pre-cut fabrics. Now let's take a look at this and you will notice that there's a lot of triangles in here. But if you pay attention and look at them, you have some that are almost half square triangles and also in the corners. And then you have these half rectangle triangles. Okay, so because they're so odd shaped, I find it easier to kind of rough cut the sizes, and it just makes the piecing go that much faster. Okay, so we're going to start with piece number 1, and I'm going to measure, and this, I have to, it's, if you can tell, it's not a perfect square, right? But I want to cut a square. So this is about almost a 2-inch square, but I need it to be a 1/2 inch all the way around. So I would cut this to be a 3 or 3.5 inch square. Now these measurements are going to be in the pattern, so you don't need to worry about them. And I need a total of 3, but I only need 2 more because I am going to make a placemat out of this, and I already have 1 block. So this is my piece number 1. Next up is piece number 2, and that I can cut as a half square triangle. So I'm going to measure this way, and it's a little over an inch, plus I need a 1/4 inch on each side, plus I need at least a 1/2 inch for cutting. I like to cut big, so I'm going to cut a 2.5 inch square like this, and I'm going to subcut them into half square triangles. So go like this, and I have 4 pieces of fabric because I need 8 pieces of these 1/4 square or half square triangles. There we go. So there's my piece 2 through 5. Next up is 6, 7, 8, and 9. And these, if I need a rectangle, I'm going to have to go 1, 2, at least 3 inches by 1.5 inches. I'm going to cut 3.5 by 2.5. It's a little big, but I'm going to be really comfortable with the way that turns out. Now, I do want to show you something. If we look at this shape here, you'll notice that the larger end of this triangle is on the right-hand side, okay? But on my actual piece, the larger part of the triangle is on the left-hand side. That's because you sew with your paper like this is. So it's kind of a mirrored image. So you have to be careful when you cut these that you cut them correctly, okay? So I'm going to show you with paper. If I cut and I take my rectangle like this and I cut it corner to corner, I end up with the paper exactly the way I want it, okay? So I want to go from bottom right to upper left, and then I will get my triangles, okay? If I cut it this way, I do not get the shape that I need. I get the shape that's on the paper, but not the shape that's on the fabric, okay? So, and if I cut my fabric wrong sides together, we want to go this way. My two fabrics on the top are the same shape, but my fabrics on the bottom are not. They're different. So just take that into consideration when you're cutting. You want to cut on the pattern, it's on the right, but in the actual cut or stitch out, it's on the left. Okay, so lower right to upper left. And I am cutting enough for, there should be 8 here. Okay, so that is piece number 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then my last dark fabric, if you look at this shape here, that's kind of a really odd shape to cut. So what I did is I measured across to try and figure out to get a half square triangle. And I added this distance here. This is 5 inches across, but I want a triangle to be like this, right? And I have to have it up like that. And that's 4 inches this way. So I cut a 4.5 inch square for this one. And then I'm going to cut it on the diagonal. So half square triangles. So we have half rectangle triangles and half square triangles. And now this piece is more than big enough to cover this area. And it's going to go out into the seam allowance back there. But you need it to cover off into your seam allowance here and here. And that's going to work. Okay. And then the last pieces are green. And I also cut them in squares. And I'm going to cut them again in half square triangles. So this is going to make my piecing go a lot faster. Okay. I've got my pattern and my pre-cut pieces, and I am ready to start sewing. So the first thing I want to do is line up this piece of fabric. This is number 1, which is light, and this is my light fabric. So I'm going to turn my pattern over, And in my light box, I can see this square here. So I'm going to put this right on top of that square, and I'm going to carefully move it over to my ironing pad, and then I'm going to press it down. I have a Teflon surface on my iron, so even though it acts like it's sticking, it doesn't really get any residue on my iron, and it is cleanable. So that's why I use a small iron. So now that's stuck on there. I'm going to let it cool a little bit. This first piece you don't want to move, so that's why I let it cool before I do the next step. Okay, so next we're going to add on piece 2, which is medium. So I need to make a line here. So what I'm going to do, I need to fold my fabric. Make sure when you do that that the lip part of your ruler is up. Otherwise, your add a quarter kind of bevels back and forth. So I'm going to fold on the line between 2 and 1. So I want the inside of the block to be to my left and the piece that I'm adding to my right. So I'm going to carefully pull this up, and I'm going to peel this fabric back. See how it's stuck to the freezer paper? And I am going to make a fold. And now this is where I want my 1/4 inch cut. So I am going to cut right here. Okay. Now I'm going to flip this over, and this is where I'm going to line up my fabric. Now this first piece of fabric is right side up. My next piece of fabric is going to be right side down. And I'm going to put it right here. Now, to make sure that I'm centered properly, there is the triangle that I can see through my paper right here. I want the point of that triangle, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, to be even with the point of my piece that I'm adding, okay? So that point, they're even. Now I'm going to carefully hold my fabric and my paper, and I'm going to pull it down, and I'm going to flip it over like that, so that my bottom, the fabric I'm adding is on the bottom and it hasn't shifted. I have raw edges together here, over here on my raw edges. All right, now I'm using a 1/4 inch foot right now, and if I set this down and I lower my needle, I will see that my needle is right next to my paper, and that's what I want. And I can see in this little tiny slot right here. So I'm just going to do a couple of these with this foot. You can use an open toe foot if you want to. I know a lot of people like clear feet, but I don't think you can see the needle as well with a clear foot, and you want that needle to go right next to your paper. Okay, I'm going to carefully take this out. I'm going to flip it over, and I am going to press this piece onto my freezer paper, and it'll stick. These first couple of pieces, you have to be careful, because if they're not stuck down, they can shift, and then your pattern's not going to come out right. On this pattern, it's not as important because of the way that it's shaped. Okay, here we go. 3. But if you were doing like a flying geese this method, you wouldn't want your pieces to shift at all. This is kind of a wonky square and a square and a square and a square kind of thing. Okay. Fold my fabric down. and trim 1/4 of an inch. Bring it over to my light box. Take my next piece of fabric. Now, if I were to line this up with this fabric, my points are not even. I have one that's here and one that's over to the left a little bit. So I just want to make sure that when my fabric is sewn, it completely covers that triangle and at least 1/4 of an inch all the way around. So I need 1/4 of an inch all the way around piece number 3 so that I can add my other pieces and have 1/4 inch seam allowance. So pull this way. If I fold it over, after a while you get used to the placement of your fabrics. See, my fabric moved a little bit, and I want it to be just right. There we go. There is some leeway in the cutting of this fabric, so you don't have to be super precise. And here's my piece number 3. Okay. You do kind of need to let these cool before you pull them off, before you flip it over. If you don't, your fabric can move. So you want to make sure that it's adhered before you flip this thing back. Okay? So now we're on 4. Same process. Fold up. Cut 1/4 of an inch away from the fold. So we're folding on the stitch line. Okay? And then add your piece of fabric. Make sure it's covered. Pinch these two and flip it over. You want to make sure that when you stitch, I can see the line right through the paper right here. You want to make sure that you stitch beyond that. That's why I stitch to the end of the fabric. Okay, I stitch from this edge to this edge of this fabric because when this is pressed open, or when it's pressed, you want to make sure that you have enough stitching that goes off into the seam allowances. Okay? So now we have piece number 5. And bring it over here to your light box so you can see. And then place your fabric right sides together. Piece 1 is the only piece that you put right side up. Everything else is right side down. And lift it up and stitch. And there, our first round is complete. And there's our first round. Now, our next round is going to come right up to this point, right here, right up to that point. So you need to be careful that when you fold your fabric, okay, if you're going to fold it not exactly on the line, you want to be to the right of the line and not to the left. Okay, so let's take 6 for example. Here's 6. If I folded it below the line here, towards the center of the block, when I stitch, it's going to cut off that point. So if you're going to err to the outside and not the inside. Okay? So what I do is I put my ruler right on that line, and then when I fold it, I know I'm not going to the inside of the line. Okay? So there, that's folded. Oops, I keep trying to cut with my iron and I don't think that's going to work very well. All right, next up is dark. Okay, so here's my dark fabric and it's going to end up like this, right? Because we cut with the thick part of the triangle on the left. So I'm going to put it this way and flip it down. Now I want to make sure that I get 1/4 inch when I flip it back that way. Okay, so, and after we do this round, we're going to switch to a different foot. And I'm going to show you how a different foot works. You can also use a completely open toe foot. What I like about the 1/4 inch foot is it puts pressure on the paper. I don't know that that has anything to do with anything. I just... And as you can see here, I didn't cut off my point. Okay, so we may not be that lucky all the way around. Okay, now we're going to do 7. Okay, this is piece number 7. And when I flip it, I completely cover. So, Every once in a while, you're liable to puncture the paper, and that's going to be fine. You're stitching next to the paper, but if you stitch on the paper, a couple of stitches here and there, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. And you can come back here and check and make sure that everything went where it's supposed to be. And if I look this way, I can see that my fabric 7 goes way beyond my piece. So that's good. That's what I want. Okay. Next up is 8. That cool a little bit. Oops. Okay. 8 is still dark. Still haven't cut off my points, so I'm very happy with that. I don't know why rubbing it makes it cooler. Maybe that's because I do that with soup, right? You stir soup to make it cooler. This is number 9. And that's not good. Here's my triangle. I want it to be out here more. So when it's folded up. When it's folded up, I need it to cover completely. And there we go. I think that's much better. Yeah. And okay. I want to double check that I folded this right. Oh, I did not. So that's my problem. My fold is not correct. Let's see if we need to retrim this. It might have gotten shifted when yeah, just a little bit. So that fold was a little wonky, and that's why it wasn't lining up properly. So now, I think I'm good. My fabric, there we go, much better. Okay. That looks better all the way around. And here's where my triangle ends, so I'm stitching way beyond that line. And over here is the other section, the other end of the triangle. And there you have it. If something doesn't feel right, it may not be, so always check. Let's make sure this worked out right. And it did. It's very close right here, but I still have 1/4 of an inch at this point right here. So I could have maybe moved it over to the left a little bit more. If you find that you're not covering everything properly, you're going to want to take that piece out and restitch it. Okay, but all of these go out beyond the next piece that we're adding. So, okay, all right. Now we're going to switch feet. And I'm going to put on an edge stitch foot. So your edge stitch foot has a little blade on it. And I'm going to prepare for the next piece, which is 10, which is here. And when I add my piece on and then I go to stitch, the blade of my foot is going to run along the edge of the paper, and then my needle will go right into the edge of the paper. And so this is my favorite foot to use. Because of that. So again, you can use a 1/4 inch foot, you can use an open toe foot, you can use an edge stitch foot. Okay? Now, this is number 10, which we are now back to light. Make sure. Yeah, 10 is light. So this goes like that. That goes like that. I have fabric beyond all the way. And I want to make sure that the blade is up against the paper. If your blade jumps the paper, your stitch is going to jump the paper as well. And there, I did not cross my point. So that makes me very happy. That is the goal, is to not cross the points. But like I said, on this particular pattern, if you do, it's not going to really matter. Okay. Here's 11, also light. Put it down. Yes. My foot pedal moved. I found with using the edge stitch foot that I can actually sew faster. The advantage to freezer paper piecing, or paper piecing with freezer paper, is that you can reuse your pattern, right? So for this project, I'm going to make 3 blocks that are the same, and so I can reuse the pattern after I'm done with this, and I can make 2 other blocks using this same freezer paper. The disadvantage is if you have a pattern that has a lot of sections to it, and you have to match points up from this section to here, you don't have that paper where you can see exactly where everything needs to match up. So that's a disadvantage. Almost dropped all my fabric in my lap. And I did drop a piece. Okay. That was 11. So next up is 12. It's really easy to lose count. But the lip of the edge stitch up to your paper. This foot is also referred to as a stitch in the ditch foot. Okay. Okay. Next up we have 13. Oops. I don't want my ruler to move when I'm folding. That's what happened when I ran into that problem with piece number 9, I think it was. Let's see. That's going to fold up that way. And I'm pretty sure that's enough all the way around. And it is all the way down to there. Go to the right just a little bit. There, I think that's a good place for that. And flip it up. You can flip this over to make sure, and it comes out all the way around, at least 1/4 of an inch around shape 13. So that's perfect. Okay. So far we're doing good. All right, now we have 14, which is medium, which is this color. So I've got those pieces. And 14 is here. Now, as you can see, these pieces are getting longer and longer to this little tiny point. So you just have to make sure that everything goes to the edge. And one more thing I want to show you once I get this trimmed. This next piece, (14), goes all the way out to our seam allowance up here. So we need to make sure that our fabric goes beyond here. Okay, beyond the, we'll write at least as far as the dotted line because that's the edge of the unfinished block. So we're going to take our fabric and we're going to set it like this, like that, and when it completely covers up to that line. So when I fold it over, I try and get like a 1/4 inch seam allowance if I can on the fold. And I'm usually larger than 1/4 of an inch when I do that. So again, all the way to the edge of the fabric. Right here is the point of this particular piece. And right here is the other point. So I'm going to go beyond both of those. Fold it over, make sure that we did. We're way beyond the dotted line. So as long as you go at least to the dotted line. So that was 14. And now 15 is up here. So by now you should be in a good rhythm. Let's sit there and Next up is 16. We switched, we're now on a medium fabric. I don't know if I said that, but just to let you know, we're on a medium fabric. Oops, there we go. Let's try that again. That's going to cut that point off. I'm making red roses, but you could make any color you wanted. And if you're making placemats like me, you could use different colors, right? You could have a red rose and a pink rose and a purple rose, or an orange rose and a yellow rose. That would look good. Uh-oh, I ran into a problem here. When I flipped, I caught my fabric, so let me take these stitches out real quick. And I'm going to have to re-sew that down here. Okay. It's sewn to here, so I'm just going to back up a little bit, and I forgot to caution you about that. On these bigger pieces, you have to be careful when you flip. Much better. So at least now you know what can happen. And again, I'm up here. When I flip it over, I can see that I'm beyond this 16 piece all the way around. So okay, and now we're on 17, 14, 15, 16, here's 17. Oops. All right. This is our last medium color. When I flip it up, looks good. So when you turn it over and you go like that, you want to make sure your fabric doesn't flip up like that, which is what happened to us the last time. And that's how we got into trouble there. There's my point. Again, you can check it. Make sure that it completely covered on the other side before you press it. Always make sure everything's where you need it to be before you press it. You will get used to how things come out, but like I said, these are kind of funky angles to work with. All right. Okay, we're now on 18. That's this piece right here. And this piece is shaped a little different, okay? And it's because we're on the outside edge of the block. And we cut these pieces as half square triangles. And the reason I did that is because this shape comes out to here. You have to go beyond the seam allowance, right? And then all the way back down here. And it just seemed easier to do that with a larger piece than with something that was cut a little bit more equal to what that shape is. So that's why I did that. Now, when I flip this over, I have to imagine this is going to go this way. I want to make sure that that's completely covered and my seam allowance is covered around to at least to there, because I do have one more piece that's coming on. But I think I want to move it to the left a little bit. Kind of imagine where this point would end up if you went that way. And I just have to make sure that I'm going all the way over to all the edges. Okay, and then this piece is going to be added on here. So I still think I want to go a little more to the left. Let's see what happens. Yeah, I think that's going to be good. All right. Oops, I lost my crisp fold. Let me get my crisp fold back. Okay, we're going beyond the paper in that direction, and we're going to go beyond the paper down here as well. Now we're going to see if we did that right. No, we caught it again. Oh my goodness. I am not being careful today. And I have to be careful when I take these stitches out, because when I lift the fabric up, it's going to come right off my pattern. So I can't really take them out the way I normally do. Turn my light off. It's blaring in my eye here. Okay. So now, when you turn this over, you kind of need to hold it like that. So when you flip it back, your fabric doesn't do what it just did to me. Let's see, my stitches are about there, so, oops, don't want to be there. Want to be back here. There we go. I know I'm good up to there, but I'm just going to stitch all the way off. Better safe than sorry. Now, when I flip this way, let's take it back here and turn our light box back on. And I can see that 18 comes out to here, and it comes way beyond there. So I'm very good on my where my seam allowance is going to be. So, and I just got to hope that my fabric didn't move too much when that, or it didn't move off of the freezer paper when I was fiddling around with it. I know this looks really weird here, but this piece is going to come along here, so it's going to be fine. All right, that was 18. So from now on, we have to be very careful because these triangles are so big. Okay. Here's my big triangle. I'll make sure we get to both edges, and we are. Make sure it's down like that before you flip it that way, right? You may want to hold it like that. We do not want to run into that again. Okay, we're going to check it. Make sure that everything got covered. Everything is covered. So now we can press it. And as you can see, this triangle goes way beyond the block, right? It's going to go way out beyond the block, and that's okay. I would rather waste a little bit of fabric than than try to line up a really strange angle on something that's this large. I know it's not really that large, but so as long as my triangle on this point here goes out to the seam allowance and this one goes out into the seam allowance, then everything is going to be fine when it flips over. That does not look right. Something, let me I'm not on the right fold. Okay, hold on. Let me refold this so I get a nice crisp fold. Okay, we want that to stay like that. Like I said, if something doesn't look right, it's probably not. Put my thumbs here on the fabric when I take this up like that. And go off the paper that way. That way I know all my seams are going into the seam allowance, or all my stitches are going off into the seam allowance. And now I can check this if I want to make sure, and it looks good. So now I can press it. And now we're on 21. This is the last of our colored pieces. The next up is the green, which is the same green that I'm going to use in the blocks that I'm going to make for these placemats. And I'm going to combine this block, 3 of these blocks, with 3 of the chains blocks. Okay, there to there. Looks good. Make sure that lays flat when I flip it over. Okay, check it to make sure everything's good. Pull it this way, everything went that way, and over there we are good. So now I can press it. All right, so last we have to add the little green pieces. Now, you don't have to add these in the order that they're in. You can just go 24, 25, 26, 20, or 22, 23, 24. It doesn't matter. But we're going to do them in order. So we're going to start with 22. But because they're on the corners, you're going to be fine. Okay. So this is just a half square triangle. And I can see the point right there. I want to make sure that when I flip this, it's going to cover everything, and it's going to. So again, you just want to make sure that you have like equal distance of your triangle beyond the paper on both sides, and that these points are even with each other. There's like a straight line going down here. Okay. And then stitch beyond the paper. Start that side of the paper back here, and then stitch off the paper down here. And now when we flip this, it covers all of the paper, which is what we want. So let's get that pressed down. And again, you could wait until you had all 4 sides sewn before you press them if you wanted to. All right, 23 is up here. I almost didn't do right sides together. And you don't have to cover the paper. Remember, we cut the paper 1/4 of an inch beyond the block size, the unfinished block size. So you just have to cover the dotted line. We flip this back and it covers. So it doesn't cover the paper right here, but it does cover the dotted line. So and by stitching all the way out to here, we make sure that we have stitches all the way in our seam allowance, because you don't want your block to fall apart after you trim it down to your unfinished size before you stitch it into whatever project you're going to do. And maybe you'll just make one and turn it into a little mug rug. Or maybe you'll put it in an entire quilt. That would be fun. Now this piece, I went into the seam allowance when I was cutting, and I really don't want to waste the fabric, but when I flip this over, that is probably going to get cut off anyway, so I'm just going to leave it. We'll see what happens. And if it doesn't get cut off in this, when we trim this down, it will get hidden in the seam allowance when I sew it into something else. That's what we're hoping for. Let's see. Yep, that's going to be cut off, so that's fine. Yep, it's right on that line right there, so that's going to get trimmed right off. Okay. Oh, we have one more piece to put on, and I just dropped it. There it is. And then after this piece, we can trim it down. Oops, see my fabric or how it moved when I flipped it over? So I don't want that. I want it to be even with, I want my raw edges together, just like you would if you were doing regular piecing. Oh, it keeps moving on me. There we go. Right. So we are done with the sewing. And next up, I'm going to take this to the board to cut it because I find trying to cut it exactly on this, in this orientation is not really good for me. So we're going to take this to the board and get it cut out, or get the block trimmed down to 6.5 inches. Here is our block ready to be cut. And I've pressed it, it's cooled. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to put my, this is a 6.5 inch square ruler, which is what I want this to end up being. So I'm just making sure that I'm on, the ruler is right on the edge of this dotted line all the way around. And there we go. So I'm going to cut. I'm trimming the paper off as well. I lift my hand before I turn so that nothing moves. You don't want the ruler to shift. There you go. Now here's the part everybody loves about freezer paper. You don't have to rip out any stitches. We got one right there. It just comes right off. And this is reusable. So you can use this for as many blocks as you want. So here is our first block. And we are going to, you can make as many as you want. I'm going to make some placemats with mine. So there you go. That's the rose block.